You're listening to the JustDjango Podcast. My name is Matthew Frere. I'm the host of the show and creator of JustDjango. In this first season, I'm having conversations with individual creators, founders, and entrepreneurs that are using Django to run profitable online businesses and side projects. This episode's guest is Allison Seboldt. Allison is a software developer, indie hacker, and creator of Fantasy Congress, which is an online game that takes a fantasy sports spin on politics. Cool. Okay, so let's start with how you got started with Django.
So I got started with Django because of Fantasy Congress. So in 2018, I quit my job to pursue Fantasy Congress, and at my previous job, we had worked a lot with Flask. So initially, and I really liked Flask. Initially, I built Fantasy Congress on top of Flask, and that
Okay.
was a lot. So at the end of 2018, I kind of used that year to build my MVP, and it was based on the election initially. So at the end of that year, it was clear I needed to pivot to something more year round. A lot of people were asking for that too. So I was planning on burning everything to the ground and rebuilding. And I knew about Django. I had just never really had a reason to use it before because Flask always fit my needs. And then when I after I went through the 2018 version of Fantasy Congress with Flask, I was like, okay, I need to check out Django because this seems a lot more robust and it seems like it has a lot of the boilerplate that I need.
Right.
Um, so yeah, beginning of 2019, I started working with it.
Okay. So, from what I have read, I think you taught yourself coding. Am I right?
hmm
When you were in college or just studying in general, um, how did you start taking up self studying, not only Django but just taking it up in general?
Yeah, so I was one of those cool kids who in junior high was building little websites and stuff like that. So I had always had an interest in coding. And after college, I majored in public relations and political science, and I graduated college and I was like, I'm gonna go out and change the world. And then I started working for a nonprofit running a canvassing office, and I was like, holy shit, this is terrible. Changing the world is so hard. I don't want to work with the general public. And I was like, I always loved computers. Maybe I should do that. It seems like you can make a lot of money doing that too. So I just yeah, I buckled down and studied. Initially, I got my start working in the WordPress Joomla space. So it was kind of I learned front end stuff, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then I started picking up PHP because WordPress was super, super popular. This was 2013 when I was, trying to make the official transition. So I worked in that space for a while, and then I got another job where they, were like, we want you to do website stuff, but also application stuff. And that's kind of where I wanted to move my career anyways. I didn't want to just build websites. I wanted to build stuff that does stuff.
Mm,
That seemed
right.
really cool to me. So, and that's where I got introduced to Python and Flask.
This is on your job that you're
Yeah,
introduced to
yeah,
Python. Okay.
yeah.
So just to paint the timeline, so it was 2013, you were getting started with just WordPress stuff, and then you were actually working as a web developer or software developer, and then through your job actually got into Python and Django.
Yeah, so I got that job in 2016 actually, and that's when I first
Okay.
started working with Python,
Okay.
and I
Yeah,
loved it.
one of yeah, I mean, it's it's interesting because like being self-taught, it's, I mean, I don't think it's the easiest thing. So I
No.
was going to ask you in terms of how you learned online, did you did you use YouTube University and free resources, or is there something that you went through that kind of helped structure everything for you?
Yeah, so I did it mostly for free. I did stuff like Code Academy and stuff like that. And when
Okay.
I was first picking up Python too, I think I used Code Academy to just do some basic tutorials, like learning the syntax and stuff like that. So initially when I started, when I, fully decided I want to do this transition, I thought I needed to have some kind of formal schooling. It just like, it just felt like I needed something official. And so I signed up for like an introductory computer science course at my local community college. And it was all online, and all it was you bought a book, and the guy just told you to read a chapter in the book and do the exercises at the end of that chapter and like upload them. And I don't even know if he like I honestly like the way I remember it, like he was just grading us based on participation too. It's like if you just did it, like it didn't even have to work. As long as you just did it, you got the points. And I was like, I paid $400 for this. Like I didn't have like a ton of money at the time either. I was so mad. I was like, "Oh, so you're saying I can just teach myself?" Apparently, like if
Right.
you go to school, they're just going to have you teach yourself anyways. So, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a super valuable skill to pick up, like being able to like learn, programming and pick stuff up by yourself, just because like the way the industry works, like you're going to be doing it anyways. Um,
Yeah, that's so true, actually. Yeah. I mean, I found that through university in general, not even just coding, but any subject. Majority of the time, you'll end up teaching yourself anyway. Exactly like you said, just you're going through the textbook anyway, and the lecturers most of the time, at least my experience was, uh, they read the PowerPoint slides to you. That's about it. That's about as far as it goes. So everything else is kind of homework. But
yeah.
I'm curious with your self-learning journey, because I personally think learning Django by yourself is not easy. Um, I think a lot of the time you could use structured resources to help you just know what to learn, because a lot of the time it's not that you're really learning specific things, but trying to figure out in what order you should learn things. So
Yeah.
when yeah, please.
Oh, sorry. Well, I was gonna say I definitely like made mistakes in the beginning. Um, it Yeah, I didn't really I don't know. I used like a lot of tutorials and stuff like that. I kind of just like jumped into it, and the way that like my app is structured is it's two Django apps actually. So like all of the data about like the members of Congress, that is its own app, and then like the actual game and like leagues and teams and stuff like that is another app. So initially like I kind of like started small because I figured like I'm probably going to make mistakes. This is my first time like messing around with this framework. So, yeah, definitely I made some mistakes like just being like able to, get data from the database and stuff like that. I was doing it in probably like the least efficient way, cuz Django has like a lot of like really robust methods for that, and it's just like your
Right.
first time jumping in, like you're not going to pick up on that stuff.
Right.
So,
So sorry, just going back now to your job, just to fully understand this. When you were working on the job, you started picking up Python. Were you working with Django then on the job, actually as a tool? Like, was the company using Django?
no, I mean, some people at the company might have been using Django, but I was specifically using Flask. That's all that my team used.
Okay, yeah. I've heard that when you rebuild something, it's actually good. You'll end up stripping away all the inefficiencies, and by the time you've rebuilt it, you completely understand the project way more than you did the first time. Is that something you experienced?
Oh yeah, definitely. Because it made me like, yeah, I was like so many moments where I was like, why did I set this up this way? Like, and plus
Right.
too, I was making the classic mistakes of trying to be ready to scale before like that's necessary at all, and it just like but, like, it wouldn't have worked anyways, like, I was like, just I was trying to make decisions before there was any reasoning for it, and it's like, you're gonna make the wrong decision, so,
Mm,
like, it definitely helped me, like, scrape away all the unnecessary stuff and just get back to the basics, and,
yeah.
when you're building something, like, I think that's the best way to do it is just, like, start with the basics, master the
Yeah.
basics, and then you have a platform that you can build on top of.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, when I started building just Django, I mean, if I think about it, the first version compared to now, it's kind of worlds apart, and it's difficult to really try and remember the original, because it's like you say, terrible database calls, everything's inefficient, everything's slow. You don't really optimize CSS or anything. It's like really bad compared to how you do it now. But over time, when you do these small incremental changes, then that's how you get better and that's how you learn.
Yeah, the current version of Fantasy Congress, it's like such a Frankenstein to me. I like want to burn it all down to the ground again, but it's like, no, I just did that last year. I can't like burn it all down and rebuild it again. That was so much to do. Like, right now I'm just trying to focus on like the incremental changes. It's like, okay,
Yes.
so like this month I'm going to focus on like the database queries, and like next month I'm going to focus on fixing up the permissions and stuff like that. So,
Right. Well, you're not alone. I get that feeling sometimes as well, where I'm like, you know what, this is all just not working. And I'm like, okay, let's redo everything. But then, yeah, you get some sanity, and it kind of becomes these decisions of, will this really add value? Like, even if I do improve these small things, will this actually in the long term be a good decision? So normally it's not. And I think that's actually true for the smaller projects as well. Like, sometimes you don't need to focus on these really nitty gritty details. It's okay to let those things slide in the beginning just to get something out there, you know?
yeah, like something I'm trying to or like a mindset I'm trying to like train myself into right now is being prepared to refactor in the future. Because like eventually, if all goes well, you will need to scale, but you really shouldn't focus on building like those aspects of the app right now.
Yeah,
But like
100%.
later on in life, things are going to have to change. So it's like kind of like building that into my process of like thinking long term and stuff like that. It's not only like and then I'll build the next feature and then I'll build the next feature. It's like thinking about like, okay, like eventually I'm going to have to balance like a new feature, but also like at some point this does have to be refactored. So just kind of like trying to think more about that and be conscious of that, and like, hey, this doesn't have to be perfect right now. We can come back and revisit it in the future. Okay, let's plan on when we're going to revisit it in the future, and like
Right.
that kind of thing.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good skill to have. I think it's also difficult, like knowing how to design it in a way that it can achieve what you need right now, but that you can change it easily later on.
Hmm.
Um, but I think in my experience, particularly with freelancing, a lot of people will say, like, when they're describing the scope of the project, they want a React app with WebSockets, and they want it to be super fast. And just when you listen to all these things, you at least the way I approach it is just, listen, let's just make it a basic Django project, and it's like simple Ajax calls, and really that's going to get your job done. You're going to spend so much more money than what is necessary, and the feature is going to work exactly like how you need it to work, and then you can test it out. And if you get enough validation, then and only then will you have reason to go into those kind of technologies.
Yeah, definitely. This past spring, I was contracting for a software agency, and like so many times, I just wanted to tell the client, like, I wish you knew what like lean startup principles were, because
Right.
like you are asking us to do like our deliverables are way too crazy, and it's just like, oh, and they were terrible for like scope creep too.
Mm,
So it was just like, you don't need all of this, honestly. Like it would be better if we just like perfected, yeah, we like just worked on the basics and we just perfected like these three things about the app. Like it doesn't need to be on Kubernetes and like
right.
all this
Yes.
crazy stuff. Like,
Oh, I get that all the time.
yeah, it's oh man, it's just I wish everyone had to go through the process of like building a startup at least once, and like
Yes,
just
definitely.
the world of apps and technology would be so much better for it, I feel.
No, I agree. So yeah, you're freelancing, or at least I think you've got consulting on your website that people
Mhm.
can get in touch with you for. How do you balance the consulting slash freelancing with your side projects? Like, um, do you schedule, let's say, like the morning to work on your stuff, and then afternoon is client stuff, or do you say like, I'm going to take on this client for a month, and then I will just allocate my time to that and kind of put projects on the back burner? Like, how do you kind of schedule and prioritize things?
It's something I'm still trying to figure out. What really worked for me this past spring was I like got really into having a routine and scheduling my hours. So, like at this place that I was contracting out for, I was doing 20 hours a week for them. And like they were kind of funny. They were like, we don't care about like nobody. You don't have to have set hours and stuff like that. Like as long as you just show up for meetings and respond to emails. Like they were all like trying to be like cool and stuff about like work life balance. And I was like, okay, here are my set hours that I will be working for you, and like if you need to reach me, those are the hours to reach me kind of deal. So that like really
Mm,
helped. And then in the morning, I was like, these are my fantasy congress hours, and I will be doing that stuff and I will not be reachable at that time. So it's
right.
creating a schedule and having a routine for me, like has helped me so much in
Yeah.
managing like time and just managing like projects and stuff too, because then I know I can plan out ahead of time. It's like, okay, this week because of whatever's going on in the world, like I know that I only have 10 hours this week to work on Fantasy Congress. So what am I going to deliver this week? Like what should I work on? And it helps me plan out a lot that way.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same. I would structure depending on the client's time zone, because well, I'm in South Africa, so I kind of have that benefit. If I have a client in the States, then I'll schedule my time to be the evening so that it goes with their morning. If the client's in Australia or that sort of time zone, then I'll do morning, allocate 3 hours there, and correspond that to their afternoon. And that seems to work pretty well. Uh, but it is quite a big chunk of the day that goes out when you do that. So, but I think, like you said, it's kind of just communication. You put that up
Hmm.
front and you say, "This is how I'm going to do it." It. I mean, if you are good with that, then cool. If you're not, I'm not the right person.
Yeah. Yeah. Communication, like, especially like balancing work with clients, like communication is like the biggest issue,
Yeah,
I think. Yeah, it's
yeah,
like the thing that you have to get right.
yeah. No, I think get it in writing as well.
Yeah.
Actually, I just spoke with Corey Zhu. I don't know if you're familiar with
Yep,
him.
I know Corey.
Yeah, he was the first guest of the podcast. Shout out to Corey. And I asked him the same question about freelancing because he does a little bit of consulting on the side, and he had a very, I guess, practical answer, which was that you do it just to pay the bills, and then when things are going well, you don't do it. So in terms of like how you balance that with side projects, so if things are going really well on the side project, then you can afford to not have to freelance as much as you would if the side project's not going that well, which I think is a good, probably an intuitive way to work if you're an indie hacker and a freelancer.
Yeah, that's definitely what happened to me this summer. So, um, the agency that I was contracting out of, I started working with them last November, and this client that they had was huge. It was ultrasound software, and their contract with them was, like a multi-year contract. So it was like basically a part-time job. Like I was expected to be like with them, throughout this whole contract, but then coronavirus happened. And
Mm.
in the summer, they basically lost like all of their clients and had to shut down.
Oh
But,
wow.
like, I had been making enough money that I had quite a bit of savings saved up, so it was like, well, we're coming into the fall and it's election season, and, one of my big audiences is teachers, and they're all remote this year, so I was like, "Hey, you know what? I'm gonna take, like, the next 3 or 4 months and just go to town on Fantasy Congress, see what happens, and if it doesn't
That's
happen, I'll pick
awesome.
up some more gigs and go from there."
Mm.
So, definitely, like, yeah, like being able to save is another important freelancing skill.
Yes. No, 100%. It's actually interesting with the elections coming up now. Do you feel like that's going to play in your favor?
I think it is. It makes politics more relevant. It's like on everybody's mind, like especially people who normally like, maybe are more like on the fringe about it, and like it's like when there's like a big event, it's easier for people to get into something. So
Mm.
I definitely think that it's making people more interested.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, um, I think it should have a good impact. It shouldn't have a bad impact. Uh, but I think there's actually a lot of opportunity there, like to also be kind of controversial, not too controversial because I know it can get quite hectic, but to be a little bit controversial just to get attention. I mean, it's like the
Mhm.
perfect time to do something very Richard Branson, like a really I don't know how to explain it, but like I think there's a story of him where he made a bet with somebody, and the bet was I think his airline versus his competitor's airline, and it was so, the bet was that if he won, his rival would have to do this kind of gig, but he'd be butt naked, and then obviously the vice versa was that if he lost, he'd have to do it. And to him, it was a win-win because it was like if he won, then his opponent or his rival did that. But if he lost, he'd still get that attention. And he landed up losing, and he did it. And it caused such a controversy, but it landed up playing in his favor anyway. So it was all mindset. I think there's opportunity for that for you to do with the election.
Yeah, it's like, not to say that I'm capitalizing on the current political atmosphere or anything, but like it's kind of funny because there's so much controversy happening right now. Like Fantasy Congress kind of just like piggybacks off of that, you know? So it's like,
Mm,
hey, do you want to know like why they haven't passed another stimulus bill? Like if you played Fantasy Congress, you'd know that like four people have introduced, this isn't like what's actually happening, but I'm just saying like
right.
hypothetically, like, four people have introduced these different bills and they voted on them and but it won't pass the Senate or whatever. So yeah,
Yeah.
or like with the confirming the new like Supreme Court justice and stuff like that. So like
Mm.
they're having hearings on that right now and they're going to be voting on that soon. And yeah, so it's just like the marketing stuff is something that I haven't really figured out yet. I'm still so fresh to that, so
I don't think anyone ever
still
does.
learning.
Yeah. Okay. Well, no, it sounds really interesting. So I'll definitely be keeping an eye out to see what the effect is, and the blog posts that you put out right during and after the election. Um,
Mhm.
with COVID, did you find any kind of correlation with metrics on your site? Like, did it improve sales, visits?
Well,
Um,
what's funny is like, so I launched like the Fantasy Congress 2.0 in February of this year. And when COVID happened, I was like, oh man, like nobody, everybody's just going to churn immediately and no one's going to do this. But I wasn't even marketing at the time because I was still like, I had wanted to release more features for educators. So I was like still so like in my coding bubble. And there were still people showing up and signing up and stuff like that. And like a lot of like not that many people did churn. So it was kind of funny. It was like I think one, it's like a novel way to like stay in touch with your friends. If you've ever played fantasy sports before, like half the fun
right.
of fantasy football is just like teasing your friends and like going, watching games with your friends and stuff like that. So I feel like I remember in April, everybody was like looking for, new things to do on Zoom with your friends to like stay in touch because it was all social distance. So I feel like there was that aspect of it. It's like, hey, this is like something silly and different you can do with your friends that you probably haven't done before.
Yeah.
Um, and then too, like I think like for my core audience, like the people who are actually interested in politics and stuff like that, like any kind of, again, not to say that I'm capitalizing on it, but this is just like the nature of the topic, like any kind of tragedy, like makes politics even more relevant because it's like, what are they doing? Like we need to be paying attention to that. So,
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I mean, I think probably more people would online in general, at least from what I experienced. I don't know if it had direct impact on sales, but it's interesting to hear your perspective on it. Yeah, it's actually quite funny how you put it in terms of anytime there's a political like tragedy,
yeah.
it plays to your advantage. It's actually very cool.
Well, it's not so much that it's a tragedy, it's just politics is always relevant. And I mean,
Mm,
so it's like it's something whether something good or bad happens, like, like it's just always relevant to our lives. So I was
Right.
really expecting like, traffic to like go to zero and for no one to sign up, but people kept trickling in and it was fascinating because they were just finding it totally on their own. I've talked to people, over the past 2 years I've been doing this. I've, talked to some people like, hey, how did you find this? And they were like, oh, I was talking to my friend about how, like, what if there was fantasy football for politics? And I was like, that's gotta exist. And then I Googled it and turns out there is. Or like, like people come up with the idea themselves and they just, they land up on the site one way or another. So yeah, there were
Right.
actually people like searching for that kind of thing. Like I got quite a bit of
Yeah.
traffic from Google. So, it's like people actually searching for that kind of thing. And again, I think that that has to do, it's like no matter what's happening in the world, like when stuff is crazy, good or bad, like that just makes politics even more relevant. So,
Mhm. That's really interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well, you mentioned that you were that all the teachers had gone online and or working remotely. How did that affect your sort of outreach to them? Because I'm sure a lot of them were trying to just get used to the system,
mhm.
and that they were more focused on like their own things and making sure that their classes were running. So how did that impact you?
Yeah, so I will say, like, as much as I thought, um, like, the teachers would really latch on to this year, it's actually, like, not been as much as I expected it to be, and from, like, what I've gathered talking to my friends who teach or, like, people who are involved in the space, like, it's just been such a crazy time that, like,
Mm.
they've, like they're just trying to cope and, like, I'm in a Facebook group, so the reason why I target teachers actually, initially when I first built it, I was just thinking about me and my friends and like, "Oh, this is a funny thing that we would do. I bet there's other people who would like this too." But in 2018, it got shared in this Facebook group of 4,500 AP government teachers. Um,
Uh,
and yeah, I know, right? And they went like crazy about it and they like all signed up at once and they were like I had like this like whole app for like live drafts and like I did too much for the MVP. But like it was with WebSockets and I built it in 2 weeks and it was like not very good. So like they all tried to sign up at once and they were all drafting their like classes of like 30 kids at a time and they were like crashing my
oh,
app. So like when that happened, I was like, oh, like I always thought like teachers might find this interesting, but it turns out this is providing some serious value for them.
yeah.
So I had like a bunch of teachers on my email list from that, like from the MVP basically. And then I actually was able to get access to the Facebook group. It's a closed Facebook group, but like because they were having so much trouble with my app, I like sent a message to the admins and I was like, I heard that this is where everybody's coming from. Could I please enter the group so I can do like tech support with them? And they let me in and they like let me stay and stuff. And like it's been a really good learning experience like so from that group I've learned that this year like just all the crazy things they've had to deal with like a week before school's supposed to start for them their school hasn't decided whether or not they're doing Zoom lessons or if they're having the kids come to class like just they've
Mm,
been thrown everything. So I think it's just been like such a crazy time. Thinking about extra stuff has been
right.
difficult.
Yeah.
um, so
No, that's really cool. I mean, that Facebook group was, I mean, set up for you. It's not like you even had to create the community. So that's like you literally got a group of people that were your ideal users, and you get to ask them questions directly in that group, and they were enjoying it. I mean, that's like enough validation, surely, to tell you this is something people want to use.
yeah, definitely that like when I did it in 2018, it it was the first time I'd ever done anything like this. So I was learning and the election was coming up and I was like, this I've learned so much. I'm doing it wrong. Like I think I'm going to shut this down or it's just going to be like this, small thing I do on the side, and I'm going to pursue other stuff. But then like when I got in the Facebook group and I saw how like eager and excited they were about this, and I like asked them to pay money for it and they paid me money for it, I was like, oh, wait, this actually, I've just validated it. I just validated my
Right.
MVP. Like, okay, so this is my target audience now, basically.
Mm.
And it's so crazy because they found me. So like
Yes.
there wasn't any kind of, I think I ran like some Reddit ads or something like terrible like that. That was like the only outreach I really did in 2018 because again, I was like in my coding bubble spending way too much time building features and doing all this different stuff like that. So the fact that they
Okay.
found me is pretty crazy and pretty lucky.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, most people would like drool at the mouth to have something like
Yeah,
that. That's honestly for every indie hacker out there, that's amazing to get that.
yeah.
Are you actually working full time on the project now?
Yeah, I have been. So my contract officially ended with that agency in end of June. So since
Okay.
July, I've been working full time on it.
Okay. Yeah, I've read most of the, if not all of the blog posts on your site, just keeping up to date with it, and it's been really interesting. One of the things that stood out the most was the fact that you got a $1,000 loan.
Yeah.
I think, could you talk about that? Just the reason for the loan, why you didn't. I feel like most people would say, I need money, so I need an investor. And it's like, no, most of the time you really don't. You just need the money. So could you talk about that, just the whole process?
Yeah. So it was like so crazy. Never in my life, like I am so weird and frugal about money. So like I don't think I would ever have a business where I took on like investors or angel investors, anything like that, or VC. Um, I never imagined I'd be the kind of person who would get a loan. So in June, my sister, she does like freelance copywriting, and she was like, "Hey, I heard about this like grant that the government's doing. I think this might have been like the paycheck loan stimulus stuff that they passed. There was this like grant a part of it, and I think it was $1,000, and you just like applied online, and they would tell you whether or not you got the money. And she got it, and she was like, "You should apply too." And I was like, "Because a grant, you don't have to like pay back. It's just they just give you money." So I was like, that would be awesome because I need my savings to live on right now. Like I don't have any money to like test with marketing stuff, like I want to try ads or I want to try like sponsored blog posts and you know marketing is so much experimentation is what I've realized. And it was like if I want stuff to work this fall, like, well, I don't know if I really have time to like figure out content marketing. So it would be nice to have like 1K just to like, test ads and experiment with like different marketing channels basically. So I applied for the grant. I didn't get it, but in the process, it was very strange. In the process of applying for the grant, they also just put you through this approval process for a loan. And so like they were like, "Oh, you didn't get the grant, but hey, here's this loan that you can have and it's $1,000." And at first I like deleted the email and I was like, "I don't want a loan. Get out of here." Like that sounds like a terrible idea for me. Um, but then like, they like kept sending you emails like, "Hey, if you don't like approve this loan in a month, it's going to go away." And so like I took a look at it and it's like better than a credit card. Like you don't have to start paying it off until next year. So I don't have to start paying it off until next July. My minimum payment is $5 a month and it like the loan you have 30 years to pay it off. So
Okay. No
I was
brainer.
like,
Yeah.
okay, this is like cheaper than my credit card. So why, like, I know I'll be able to pay that off. Like, even if
Right.
Fantasy Congress went totally bankrupt, like, I'll have a job and like I can pay that
Yeah.
off. So there was no risk. Like, I'm pretty risk adverse, I feel. Um, so, or like maybe I'm not risk adverse. Like I feel like I don't like to take risks. I like to be very calculated. So like this just didn't feel very risky at all. So I was like, oh, I
Right.
should just do this. And then I've spent like $1,000 these past 3 months, like I tried Facebook ads, and, I did like a sponsored blog post. So
Yeah. Okay, so the primary reason was marketing, really.
yeah, for sure. Just to have like the chance to experiment with some different channels that I
Yeah.
normally wouldn't.
Right. It sounds very familiar to a book I'm busy reading called Traction, which was ironically promoted by, well, not promoted, recommended by Corey as well. And it's really exactly what you're saying. You kind of test out these different channels, and you're trying to see which ones get the most traction, and then from that you can decide where's best to kind of invest your money. So what you're talking about, like with sponsored blog posts, that's exactly what this book is talking about. So how were you going about the sponsoring of blog posts? Like, what was your process of finding something that would actually resonate with Fantasy Congress? Are you going for political blogs, I'm sure?
No, I went for so I kind of discovered through the Facebook ads that like they call it ed tech, so it's like educational, like technology being used in the educational space, so like educational apps and stuff like that. That's
That's
like a
interesting.
really big exciting world in the education space right now is ed tech.
Hmm.
So I found this ed tech blogger through Twitter, I think, and reached out to her and was like, "Hey, like, any chance that we could collaborate together?" Like initially, like I approached it as like a collaboration, and she was like, "Yeah, sure. Like actually, like if you want, like you can do like a sponsored post." And I was like, "Oh, hey, I got this loan money, so sure, yeah, why not try it?" And that actually launched yesterday. So she posted it
Okay.
yesterday. Yeah. So I
Okay,
don't
cool.
know
So
what
you
the results
still,
are yet.
yeah, yeah, you're still going to see how that plays out. Okay. Um, so have you actually considered making Fantasy Congress a mobile app?
Yeah, and some people have said they want that. I have never made a mobile app yet. So it's like on my to-do list, but it's not the most important thing right now.
Yeah,
I've
version
mostly just
5.
focused, yeah, version 5, exactly. I've mostly just like tried to make sure it works on mobile really well. So
Sure. Yeah, I think something like a progressive web app could be like the first testing phase for that idea.
yeah.
That's really interesting. I just want to go back to the teachers part. There was something, I don't know if you talked about it, but it was basically the idea of offering Fantasy Congress as a B2B service and not a B2C.
Mhm.
Um, and Just Django's had a very similar sort of thing because it's kind of targeted towards individuals, but then I started to work on features to have a classroom and have a teacher sign up, and then they can have all their students enrolled in the same classroom. And it really kind of shifts a lot of things around and makes you think of things completely differently. It almost changes the entire business. Well, it changes the entire business because it's now your marketing changes, the actual product. You have to have features that a manager or like a teacher would want. They need to be able to see different students' profiles like at a glance. So it's really a lot of work, like on all sides, engineering and marketing. And I think there would be some interesting comments that you could make on your sort of transition. I call it that, but maybe that's what you were aiming for all this time. Could you talk about that whole process of B2B and B2C?
Yeah. Well, definitely it wasn't something I aimed for initially, but again, I'm so lucky it happened because building a B2C as an indie hacker, unless you have like a mega audience that you can initially like, unless you initially have like an email list with like 30,000 people on it, and like at least 30% of those people always open the email, like it's
Yeah,
just the amount of time it takes to figure out marketing and outreach and product market fit and stuff like that. Because with consumers, you just can't charge as much as you could with B2B, you know?
right.
So, like, discovering that teachers really needed Fantasy Congress and that I could transition it to more of a B2B is like kind of what saved it, I feel. Because I don't know if like it could have kept going the way it was as a B2C. I'm pretty lucky because like the teachers don't need that many extra features. Like the core
Okay.
element of the app um, is like the same for individuals or recreational players as it is for like the students using it, but they do need some extra administrative stuff. So I did have to build like, here's how you add students, and here's where you can see all their students, and you can change their password and their username, and you have access to change their team names, because I learned that in the MVP too, like letting kids just be able to
Uh-huh.
write whatever they want. They will do it. They will. So you definitely teachers definitely need access to like change that stuff. So
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, so it was the features were pretty much consistent for whether it was a teacher or an individual signing up.
mhm.
But yeah, I think it's pretty cool that Fantasy Congress is essentially, I wouldn't, I mean, you could call it a game, but it has game aspects. So it must be fun to actually work on a project that's a game at the end of the day.
Yeah. It is fun. It's kind of nerve-wracking though, because like like with a traditional business, it's like I like the value I provide is so clear, it's like it makes you more money. And with a game, the value you provide is it's fun. And so it's
Mm.
like, but like that's so subjective. So like is that's kind of like my guiding star. I always like everything I do or any feature I release, I'm like, is this either like solving a problem and being able to play the game, or is it making the game more fun? So like fun is really my guiding star, but yeah, it's like nerve wracking because it's so subjective. It's like, oh, if I think this is fun, will everybody else think it's fun? And I like, I try to ask for feedback from my audience either through Twitter or through my email list. Like I always try to make sure like any changes I make to the game is something that they like and that they're excited about. So, like in October here, I plan to launch news mentions. So, you'll get points for how often Congress members on your team are mentioned in the news.
Okay.
And that's something
Wow.
that like people have been asking for because the news cycle is a big part of politics. So,
Yeah, of course. I mean, you're obviously going to monitor certain news sources, not everything. Well, I don't know
mhm.
actually. How would you approach that?
Yeah, right now I have 9 on my list, and
Okay.
I'm using like, my basis for it is it's like the Wall Street Journal and New York Times, It's like big publications that have been around for a long time. They have a high Alexa rating, which, Alexa, like, measures, like, traffic to it is owned by Amazon, but it's not like the Alexa that sits in your kitchen, it's some other Amazon company that they had that's called Alexa, but they basically, like, would measure how much traffic a website gets and, like, rank them based off their traffic. So it's like high, high amounts of traffic and, like, high domain rating. So basically, I was trying to say, like, not that these are, like, the most reputable news sources, it's more like these are the news sources that the public is going to the most. So, like, these are the
Okay.
news sources with, like, the biggest influence, and again, it's about and the whole point of, like, adding that to the game is it's, like, about measuring the news cycle and, like, how impactful is your member of Congress? Well, if they're making an impact in the news cycle, they're doing something. So,
Right. Yeah. It's really interesting. In terms of like the technologies that you're using to achieve that, I'm sure you've got some sort of background process like Celery or something.
honestly, it's just Django commands, and I run them with cron. They run
Okay.
via cron on my desktop. It sounds crazy, I know. I definitely, again, like I said, ready to refactor at any moment. Oh my god, I can't. It's such a Frankenstein. I have so many things I want to fix, but it's
Okay. Wow.
working. So,
Yeah. No, I mean, don't fix what isn't broken. So if
right?
it does the job, honestly,
It's
yeah,
gonna break someday. I need to fix it before then, but until then, I'm getting by. So,
that's quite funny. Okay. So for it's quite a general question, but I mean, it's really your opinion. What do you think are some good tips that you could give to people starting their own side project or just project that they're diving into?
Hmm. Yeah, start as small as you can.
Mm,
Like, you have probably a list of features in front of you, and you can probably knock off at least 3 or 5 of them, I feel, and do that. Just perfect the basics, and once you feel like I feel like for an MVP at least, you wanna go for the thing that you can build the fastest that you can charge money for, so it's like, it has to have enough features to, like, provide some level of value, but
right.
just start with, like, one feature and then add stuff until, like, people start giving you money for it, I feel. You just wanna start small, you wanna start basic, and you're building a foundation that you plan to build upon for a long time, and I think it's just I know that, like, move fast and break things is the Silicon Valley model, but
Hmm.
I'm not a fan. I say, like, move slow, build slowly, and, securely.
Right. Yeah. I think something that kind of ties in with that, the idea of move fast. Maybe it doesn't, but maybe you could talk on it. Is the idea of like hustle culture,
Mm,
because it's like you have to, if you're starting a side project, you've got to go all in, sleep 5 hours a day,
mm.
live off coffee. What do you think about that kind of approach?
I'm so not a fan. It's like it's just so short term, and if you wanna actually build something that lasts, like, if you actually wanna start a business, are you just, like, trying to throw something up on Product Hunt and just maybe make, like, a couple $100 from it? Or are you trying to, like, build something that's going to last? Like, I understand there's a little bit, when you're first validating and creating an MVP, there's a little bit of balance between, like, the hustle and, like, building to last, but I really I don't know, like, I'm not a fan of the hustle culture stuff. I feel like it's just for Instagram. It just, like,
Yeah.
makes you feel
Yeah.
excited,
Right.
it resonates with people, and it creates a feeling, and it creates emotion, but it's a marathon and not a sprint, and you gotta figure it's not sustainable, at some point, like, you're not gonna be able to run on coffee alone, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
at some
No,
point, it's gonna be a grind, and hustle
yes.
culture, like, just tries to ignore that there's any kind of grind, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's got to be a balance. I'm trying to remember the name of the podcast that Basecamp has. I can't remember, but DHH, I think I might be wrong. I think he's known on that podcast to really promote a kind of uh, like work 4 hours a day sort of thing. It's a much more relaxed approach to work. And I think some people get upset with that because it's very easy to say that from standing on top of the mountain. But when you are still going through it, you do have to put your head down. But I think the approach that kind of goes in the middle that balances that out is like what you're doing, where you freelance or you consult on the side to help pay the bills, and you can always shuffle that around. So you want your side project. I think how you said it's perfect. If you have it really small, then there's not really much pressure to build out all these features in time and get everything done. You focus on the small things and then you freelance on the side and you balance those two things to some sort of reasonable extent so that you can still live your life.
Yeah, and that's the thing about the hustle culture too that, like, kind of makes me mad because it's like, if you're working, like, if you're getting 5 hours of sleep and building all of these features, like, you're just running full speed ahead in the wrong direction probably. Like,
Mm,
it takes time to get feedback. It takes time to, like, discover bugs or issues that you might not have expected. Let's say you're relying on this third party and then all of a sudden they go away. Like, I don't know, just like random things, like stuff's going to happen. Like, there's going to be roadblocks. And if you're just going full speed at that roadblock, like, you're going to crash and burn. So, yeah.
yeah, no, I agree with that. Oh, that's awesome. Thanks so much for your time. So for people that are going to get in contact with you, what's the best way?
My personal website that I blog about, I write like monthly retrospectives on like what I was doing with Fantasy Congress, my goals and stuff like that. That's AllisonSeboldt.com. And I have a contact form there if you want to reach out to me. And then Fantasy
Awesome.
Congress is fantasycongress.com if you want to check that out. And then you can
Cool.
follow
Yeah.
me on Twitter. I'm at Allison_Seboldt.
And I'll put all of those in the show notes as well, so everyone will have that.
Cool.
Awesome.